Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the second track of our Smart Data Conference. Let me introduce Vishnu Rao from Singapore. Vishnu, maybe you would like to say a couple of words about you.
Sure. Thank you, Pasha. First of all, I want to thank everybody at Smart Data for giving me this opportunity to speak here today. It's my first time presenting at Smart Data. So, yeah, I'm based out of Singapore. I'm a senior data engineer at IOTA, which is in the ad tech domain. So, we are a audience data company. And when we say audience, user profiles comes to mind. So, we ship user profiles to companies who then show you relevant ads based on those profiles. So if Google were to show you a baseball ad, it would probably be because your profile says you like baseball. And that's where IOTA comes in as an audience company. So prior to IOTA, I was with Flipkart, which is India's largest e-commerce company. I was part of their performance team, website team, MySQL engineering team, and other teams as well, especially the big data team over there. So that's a little bit about myself. Apart from coding, I like to tango. I love Lego. Yeah, those are my two important hobbies, I would say, at the moment. And doing yoga, obviously.
Yeah, obviously. Well, Lego is awesome. How do you think are things like programming and building things from Lego are interconnected somehow?
They are. Lego is more of creativity. You can build whatever you want, I guess. There are no rules. But I think programming, there are some rules, be it the environment or the language. So, but kind of similar. But Lego is full freedom to do what you want, I would say.
By the way,
Coding, you just have.
do you think that programming is creative or engineering thing?
Programming is an expression of your creative ideas. It's you have a creative idea, and programming helps you to unleash it. So, kind of related, but it's a means to an end per se.
Yeah, that's a very interesting definition, because I tend to say that there are not too many things, not too many bullets which will say that programming is creative at all, because like we have all the bricks we need to build the house, and now we should just put them the right order and we'll have this house like in Lego. But your idea, I like it, that we can unleash our creativity inside the concept of building the house. Like, which house will it be? How will it work? Like, what trade-offs we will, put in there? Like, will it be warm or cold? And all the things about our customer, maybe. That's very interesting and wise idea. Thank you for it. Now I think it's the nice time to start your talk.
So let's start off with the talk. So again, welcome everybody, and thank you for attending my talk. Spark Yoga, saving time and money with lean data pipelines. So I found this quote online, and I found it very apt for today's presentation. In the engineering world, typically, the more you use something, the longer something runs, the more you're billed for it. And hence, I say running time is money. And I thought this would serve as a good guide for us for the presentation today. And this is something we'll focus on throughout the presentation. So, as you all know, yoga is an ancient Indian practice. It consists of multiple postures, or asanas as they call them. So, this is me doing yoga. I'm in one photo. There's a complex asana, and one there's a semi-complex asana. But not all asanas are complex. Some are simple to do and easy to do. So, what I thought of doing today is sharing some asanas for Spark, which would help you, reduce your running times of your pipelines, and by reducing running times, hopefully reduce your cost as well. So that's what I want to share with you today. And towards the end of the presentation, if we do have some time after the discussion, probably I could also share with you some simple asanas of the real yoga, if we have time, that is. So what I wanted to do is group my asanas today into 5 different categories. The first category is tuning or using a specific Spark configuration parameter. The second is choosing the kind of data lake Spark interacts with. The third is running a Spark job in a specific way. The fourth is choosing the kind of framework it runs in. And the fifth is balancing time with cost. So let's go to the first asana. Typically, when you run your Spark jobs, you will have your own set of configuration parameters which you choose. Most of them are set to default. So what I thought of doing is sharing some of my most frequently used configuration parameters. The first one is the file output committer algorithmic version. So this controls how your data is written to your destination directory. The default version is set to 1. But if you are using especially S3, setting it to 2 helps a lot. And there's a reason for this. When you set it to version 2, the number of rename operations which happen in S3 are actually lower than when you set it to version 1. So version 2 kind of helps reduce the commit time, and that reduces the running time of the job as well. So please be aware of the version which you're using, especially when it comes to S3. Also, what you could also do is another alternative is look at the new S3A committers, which were introduced by Netflix quite recently. They also help you in reducing your job commit times when saving the data to your destination directory. So I encourage you to look at them as well. Second one is your Spark serializer. Typically, by default, it's set to your Java serializer. It's kind of recommended to use your Creo serializer. And the reason is better serialization. Better in what way? It's somewhat faster than your typical serializer. And also it reduces the memory footprint of your serialized objects. So that reduces the total memory footprint of your job. But a thing to note here with the Creo serializer is you need to register some of your custom classes. Not all classes would be serialized by the Creo serializer. So you need to register them with the Creo serializer before your job starts. So that's something to note about. The third one is, and typically a lot of you guys out there do a lot of joins, dataset 1 with dataset 2. But sometimes you do come across this case where you have a small data set joined with a larger data set. And if this small data set can be held in memory and comfortably held in memory, then what we tend to do is we broadcast this smaller data set to all the nodes in the cluster. Okay. And when this happens, the larger data set now is joined kind of locally with the smaller data set. So on every node, and this kind of avoids the shuffle. So it's a more comfortable join at the end of the day. And this also helps you in reducing your overall running time. Now, this particular parameter, the broadcast join threshold, sets the buffer size to hold your smaller data set. It's typically, I think, set to 100 MB by default, I guess. But you can play around with this to, tune your job, Spark job. Now, the fourth one, and this is one of my favorites, is disabling SSL. You will tend to notice that disabling SSL reduces your running time. And we found this quite helpful with most of our Spark jobs. The fifth, if your executor is less than 32 GB, it is recommended to set the compressed OOPS option for your JVM. This helps reduce the overall memory footprint again of your job. The pointer size is reduced from 8 bytes to 4 bytes. A thing to note here is with JDK 8 and above, I think this is enabled by default. So if you're using JDK less than 8, you might want to turn on this particular flag. And in general, check if your JDK you're using supports this. If it is disabled by default, please enable it. That would help a lot. So these are some of my frequently used configs, and There are many more out there. Please do go through the documentation to see if something can help you or not. So coming to Asana 2, when you think of a data lake out there, people think of S3 or any other cloud storage out there, be it from GCP or Azure, or people think of HDFS. It could be on-prem or it could be on the cloud. So the question out there is, are there any alternatives? And on what basis do we choose a suitable data lake? So the first criteria is your data access time. How fast can we access the data? The second one is your maintenance in terms of how easy it is to interact with the lake, how easy it is to maintain the data lake, and what's the total cost in terms of your dollar to maintain this particular data lake. These are things which come in the back of your mind when you choose a data lake, right? So I just came up with a simple comparison table between S3 and HDFS. So in terms of infra maintenance, S3, you don't have to maintain anything. It's maintained by AWS. In terms of HDFS, yes, you do need to maintain your own cluster. In terms of access times, when you read from S3, it is a read over the network and probably HTTPS. With HDFS, it's a read to your local data node. And with compute, obviously S3 offers no compute. With HDFS, you do have the option of Hadoop sitting on top of HDFS to play with. So you can now your compute can come up automatically. So these are your typical differences between your S3 and HDFS. So what I also wanted to do is give you a third option, which you could think about. And that would be a local file system. So you could think of your data sitting in some sort of data lake. But when Spark has to interact with the data, you could think of Spark interacting with that data sitting on your local file system. So that's where I kind of put local file system plus S3, because not all your data can sit on your local file system. So when you think now of your local file system as the place where Spark is going to interact with your data, in terms of infra maintenance, yes, you do need to maintain your own boxes. And the disk storage can be limited with regard to your box on your local file system, and you might need to extend it. In Amazon, they extend it via EBS. So please do keep a note on the cost while extending the storage. It can be extended, but up to a certain point. So please do keep that in mind. With regard to access times, again, it's a local data access pattern. You're accessing the data on your local disk. With regard to compute, obviously, since you brought up your own boxes, it's now a question of launching your Spark workers and you get your compute. So this is one pattern which we kind of employed at IOTA. And what we also kind of noticed is during our experiments, downloading data with the AWS CLI tool was kind of faster than Spark interacting with S3. Now, to be honest, we did not tune our Spark S3 client that well, but we decided not to when we found out that, hey, we use this particular tool and it downloads the data way faster than Spark. So that's something which is kind of like a pro tip out there for you guys to think about. It's not always Spark interacting with S3. You could get the data in a different fashion. So I wanted to show you an example. This is an Airflow DAG, which we have in production. It consists of multiple steps. The second step is downloading your data to your local file system. This is accomplished using two tools. One is the AWS CLI tool, which I mentioned, which runs on every box in the cluster. Now, to orchestrate that, we use Ansible command to call AWS CLI on all the boxes in parallel. So once the data is downloaded on all the boxes, which happens in parallel, then we move to step 3, which is running our Spark job. So when people now think about orchestration, this is one way of orchestrating this entire flow, getting your data onto your local file system and then running the Spark job. One question which comes up is, hey, you're using the local file system. How do we know how to distribute the data amongst the nodes in the cluster? because let's assume you have 6 nodes and you are downloading the data to the local file system on each node. How do you know how to distribute the data? The answer is quite simple. You need to download the entire data set onto every node. Spark would pick and choose automatically once the data is there on every node. So that's a common question which people generally have with regard to the local file system. So what I wanted to highlight here is that having the local file system serve as the touch point for the data could lead to lower running times. And also, and I reiterate on this slide, yes, you do need to maintain your own boxes and your own cluster. But if the cost comes down, I believe it is a burden which you can live with. So please feel free to choose not only this pattern, but any other pattern where the cost can come down, and it might be a burden, but do try to weigh the two options out. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I think cost matters. So please do check which option would be better for you. And there are multiple other options. I wanted to highlight the local file system because this is something which people naturally, they don't look at. They tend to go with either HDFS or S3 or some other system. So coming to Asana 3, this is about how you run your job. Typically, when you think of running a Spark job, you think of a cluster and you think of submitting your Spark job in Spark client mode. But there is another way, which is the Spark local mode. In the Spark local mode, the entire Spark job runs in a single JVM. Now, you might think, hey, this is probably a way in which people write their unit tests and execute the Spark code. That's true. People do use it for running their unit tests. But it's not only for running tests, it is a valid way of running your Spark job. And think about it. If you have a problem to solve, it can be solved in multiple ways. By using Spark to solve it, you get the benefit of Spark DSL, right? And hence, once you use Spark DSL, now the second question is, do I really need a cluster? And if I do not need a cluster, Spark local mode would suffice. So you don't really need a cluster, but in the future, when the data set grows, then you can always scale your Spark job to a cluster, and you don't have to do anything. It's all about changing the running mode from Spark local mode to Spark client mode, right? So please do think about it. You don't always need a cluster until you actually need it. And Spark local mode is one of those hidden gems out there, which people generally don't see. And also, these days, Kubernetes is quite hot in terms, people like it and people like running their workloads. So think about it. You could actually package your Spark job into a small container and deploy it onto a pod on Kubernetes, and your job would run and you're done. So in terms of maintenance and deployment, that's kind of taken away by Kubernetes, and all you are concerned now about is writing the Spark code and just deploying it. So do keep an open mind out for Spark local mode as well. It's always there, and it might be helpful for you. Now, when we think of running a job, we also need to think about data preparation. Let me give you an example. So let's assume that you have two threads which are reading from two files and inserting into a database. Okay. Now, if the database can take more load, what you could do is repartition your data, which is in two files, into 4 files, have 4 threads read from these 4 files and insert into the database. Now with this, the throughput obviously increases, and when throughput increases, your running time decreases, right? So repartitioning your data set will generally help in better parallelization of your work. But there are certain circumstances for it to be beneficial. It's not always that you should repartition your data, but it should be, the number of partitions should be fair enough for Spark to actually do its magic of parallelization, right? So do keep an eye out if you need to repartition your data. It might help sometimes. Now, again, when you think of running your job, it's always good to prepare your data, as I mentioned before. Now, let us assume that you have a large data set sitting in your data lake. When I say large, the first thing which comes to your mind is it's a large data set, so probably I need a large cluster to process this data. But what you could do is shard your data into smaller data sets, right? So think about it. Instead of one Goliath, you could have multiple mini Goliaths out there. Now, this is kind of similar to the divide and conquer principle out there. So let's assume you have 100 shards or 100 folders. Now, what actually happens is you have 100 Spark jobs running on 100 smaller data sets. So you don't really need to worry now about the large data set, which kind of terrified you earlier. You now have 100 smaller data sets to work with. Now, what's the benefit here? In terms of resource allocation, when you're provisioning your cluster, you have to provision now based on the smaller data set and not the larger data set. So that means smaller boxes and smaller clusters. Now, if something fails, it fails with regard to a particular shard. So you just have to rerun your Spark job for that particular shard. And it's kind of like an isolated failure for you, which is easier rather than the entire job failing when you had only one data set where you have to rerun everything perhaps. Now, when you're debugging a failure as well, it's easy to debug with a smaller data set rather than a larger data set. So that helps you. And in the future, when you want to improve the performance of your job, you are now focused with regard to a smaller data set, which helps. And any performance improvement you find can be applied to all the other shards. So you get that benefit of multiplication of performance improvement. It's easier for you to focus now. So these are the advantages of sharding your data, your raw data for your Spark job. Now the big question is this always helpful? And the answer is no. So let me give you an example. If you shard your data using order ID or user ID, right? But your query now or your processing logic is say group by country. With this, you might need to touch all the shards when you run your processing logic. Now, this might be a bad thing. Again, you're coming back to your larger data set which you had, and in a sense, it's kind of similar because you had a larger data set and now you have smaller data sets, but again, you're going through all the data sets with one to get your answer out here. So it might not be that obvious and easy that, oh, you're sharded and it helps in every scenario. That's one. To give you another example, if you want to find out unique of users across the shards, what you could do now is you will obviously run your 100 Spark jobs for 100 small data sets and merge the results of all the shards to get the unique across all the shards, right? So in this particular case, the merge could be complex depending on the problem you solve. So sharding does help you in certain scenarios. In some cases, depending on what the problem is or what kind of query you Spark SQL query you want to run, it might be painful as well. So please do keep an eye out for that based on all the scenarios or all the business scenarios you have in mind. In our case at IOTA, sharding does help because we typically shard around user ID. We shard into 100 buckets, and most of our queries typically tend to touch an individual shard. So sharding does help in our case, but it might not help in your case out there. So just wanted to share a small screenshot of one of our S3 buckets. We have daily folders for every day. And within every daily folder, we have 100 parts or 100 folders inside of it for our raw data. And now for these 100 folders, we have 100 DAGs, 100 Airflow DAGs. So one per each folder over here. Now, it's quite simple to actually create these DAGs using a template. And that's what they use the term dynamically create DAGs. You can dynamically create Airflow DAG based on a template. And there's some sample code here. It says def, it's in Python, def create DAG. And the DAG has only one task, which is the Python operator hello world. Now below that, there is a for loop which runs from n equal to 1 to 4. So in a loop, 4 DAGs are actually created using the template above. So in our case, it's also simple. We just have to have our template and run the for loop, and we get our 100 DAGs instantaneously. So it's quite simple to also create the DAGs. You don't have to define 100 DAGs separately, all in one place over here. So again, when it comes to running a Spark job, you need to also ask your question, and this particular question: are there multiple actions defined on the same data set in the lineage? So what do I mean by this? Let me give you an example. Let's assume you load a data set into dataset 1, and you do a complex transformation of this dataset 1, and you get dataset 2. Now this complex transform, let us assume it takes a lot of time. Now after doing this transformation, we have two actions on the dataset. One is count and one is save. So what actually happens here is the complex transform is called twice because Spark lazily evaluates all the steps above when an action is called. So if it takes a lot of time, that means since complex transform is running twice, it will take a long time. So how could you optimize this? How do you save on time here? What you could do is cache the result of the complex transform. So you cache the data set which is obtained from the complex transformation. You could persist it to disk. We do that a lot at IOTA when we don't have enough of memory on the box. Please feel free to use disk. It's not always memory out there, but if you do have a lot of memory to play with, you can persist it to memory. So what actually happens with this is once you persist the data to disk or memory, when the second action is called, it reuses the data which has already been computed in the cache. So with this, obviously your running time decreases. So this is a win over here. So do think about the lineage of your data sets in your code and see if there's something which you could cache. And also remember, caching doesn't mean caching memory. If you do not have enough of memory, feel free to use the disk as well. Now, coming to Asana 4. Typically, when we think of running Spark, the framework which comes to our mind is EMR, which is available in AWS, or Yarn, which either you could run in-prem or on the cloud. But I also wanted to suggest another option which is always there, but people generally don't notice, and that's the standalone cluster, right? So when people think about a standalone cluster, the first thing which comes to your mind is, hey, we need to maintain this, right? And it's kind of different from something which somebody's offering you, like Yarn. Yarn looks much more powerful or something like that. But these are just typical perceptions people might have. But what I say is, yes, you do need to maintain your own cluster when you bring up a standalone cluster, but you could use it to your own advantage. Okay, and there are certain scenarios where standalone cluster, it does help you out. So let me give you an example of such a scenario. Think of an IO intensive job. So think about a job where you're reading some data and loading it into Cassandra. Okay, let's assume I write a job to read data and insert into Cassandra, and I deploy it onto my cluster. Okay, so if I go onto the nodes, what I would actually see is my CPU is not used to 100%. It's kind of very low. It's obvious because it's a IO intensive job. So the general feeling is, hey, my cores are not getting effectively used to their full potential, right? Now, if someone out there asks, hey, can we reduce the running time of this job, right? You would generally say, yes, it could be reduced. Now, one option to reduce the running time is to increase the throughput. So the general question which comes up next is, can we increase the number of threads or tasks? Now, the general answer is no. And I say no because let's assume you have a 4-core box. So you end up setting your Spark worker cores to 4, one for each core. Now, you wouldn't generally go more than that. So what you end up doing is now provision a new box, and there you get more cores and hence more threads. Now, when you do this, obviously, yes, your throughput increases, but since you're provisioning a new box, your cost increases. So the general answer is no, but in this particular case, you could actually increase the number of threads without provisioning a new box. Let me show you how. So let's assume that the box has n cores. What you have to do is set Spark worker cores to m, where m is greater than n. So you set it to a higher value and keep increasing this value until the load average on the box is kind of saturated. When I say saturated, all the cores are running at 100% CPU utilization. Okay, you do not go more than that. But in this particular case, since I've set it to a higher value, this is a technique which is called as oversubscribing. I'm not too sure, but I kind of figure that EMR doesn't give you this option in AWS, but you need to check about it. I'm not too sure. But the typical response of people who use EMR is, okay, I need to increase my throughput. So they generally go and provision a new box and add it to the EMR cluster, which means your cost increases. So please do check if you can oversubscribe in the framework you run in. Spark standalone cluster definitely allows you to oversubscribe. So let me show you a screenshot of a cluster which we have in production. It's a 2-node cluster, two C5 4x large boxes. So a C5 4x large box has 16 cores and 32 GB RAM. But what you will notice here in the screenshot is the cores is set to 192. So what I have done here is I have oversubscribed my box. I should have subscribed to 16 cores, but I have set the Spark worker cores to 192. Now, when I run my job and say, okay, 192 cores per Spark executor, 192 threads are now launched in this particular case. Now, for an IO intensive job, this is okay. You can do it because, as I mentioned, the CPU utilization is lower. So we are increasing the threads by oversubscribing here. But for your CPU intensive jobs, you can still set the Spark worker cores to a higher number, but make sure the cores you allocate to your executor are still set to the actual number of cores. So in this particular case, if I have a CPU intensive job, for my Spark job, I would set it to 16 cores per executor and not 192. So the scenario where it helps is generally IO intensive, and to utilize the power of oversubscribing, Spark standalone cluster does help you over there. And a lot of companies out there do employ this technique. So please do keep this in mind if you have especially IO intensive jobs. Now, another framework, as I mentioned out there, which is quite hot, is Kubernetes. So people are nowadays running their Spark jobs in Kubernetes, i.e. Spark cluster, which is provisioned in Kubernetes. So this is something which people are doing out there, and it's another option for you. What you could add on top of it is Spot instances. So imagine your Kubernetes cluster is running on top of Spot instances on the cloud. This now becomes a cheaper way of running your workloads. Now, when I say cheaper, it does come with a lot of risk, because when you choose Spot instances, they tend to go away if someone else pays more money. So in this particular case, what we generally do is we kind of split our jobs into two categories: high priority and low priority. Our low priority workloads go on to the Spark on Kubernetes cluster, backed by Spot instances, and the high priority go on to the other clusters. So the logic here is, even if the Spark job dies because the box goes away, it's okay because it's a low priority job for the business. So not all jobs are the same in terms of priority. So if you want to reduce your costs, please do keep in mind that you can add a little bit of masala, as they say, masala chai. If you know what masala chai is, you will know what masala chai is. Spicy chai. So you can spice up your Kubernetes with Spot instances, and run your workloads. And it will be a cheaper way for you to do it and reduce your cost. So coming to the final asana, at the end of the day, your cost matters, the dollar matters. Keeping in mind how long the job runs, and I use the term SLA. When I say SLA, I mean the amount of time the job runs over here. That definitely does matter. How fast can you run your job? That's what also matters. But the bottom thing is cost does matter over here. It's something which everyone looks at. But what I wanted to do was rephrase this particular statement. Cost does matter with an acceptable SLA or running time in mind. Now, what do I mean by acceptable? I'll get to that in a minute. So, as we already discussed, cost kind of bottle downs on your compute cluster cost. How long am I using the boxes? Your storage cost during your computation, right? So what you could do is you could decrease your cost with an increase in your running times. So let me give you an example. Say you have two C5 4x large boxes and the running time is 8 hours for your Spark job. Now let's put a cost of X dollars to it. Now tomorrow what you could do is change the instance type to a less powerful box, let's say T3 2x large. So theoretically, since T3 2x is kind of half of a C5 4x, theoretically you could think, okay, my running time increases to 16 hours. Okay, let's go theoretically over here. Now the cost for running the job on these T3 is Y dollar, and obviously Y dollar is less than X dollar because you've chosen a less powerful machine to do your job. But when you do this, now people might think, okay, why am I choosing a less powerful box here? I could finish my job in 8 hours. Why do I have to do it in 16? So that's where you have to question yourself. The question you need to ask is 16 hours acceptable to you? If 16 hours is acceptable to you, please go ahead with it. Okay, so that's what I mean. The SLA is now acceptable. Yes, 16 hours, it's fine to go ahead with it. You don't really need to choose a Ferrari all the time. You could choose a Toyota Prius and reach your destination comfortably, maybe in a little bit more time. But that's acceptable at the end of the day because you are saving your cost. Your dollar is being saved. And that's what matters to business as well. So coming to the end of the presentation, I came up with a simple exercise. I took a T3 large box in Amazon and I set the JVM XMX to 512 MB and ran a simple Spark job in Spark local mode. So what the Spark job which I ran is as follows. I had some data sitting in S3, ORC data, and I loaded it into a data set after selecting only a few columns, not all the columns, but just a few columns. Once the data set was loaded, then I did a simple transformation to lowercase, and I did an action on it, lowercase.count. Now, what I again did was I did another transformation to uppercase on the original data set and did an action on this, uppercase.count. So I kind of measured the time taken for this program to run, and the running time was around 12.5 minutes. So I decided to apply some asanas on top of it. Since I'm reading from S3, I disabled SSL. I noticed that the running time decreased to 11.4, which is a 1 minute lesser than the previous runtime. Now I also kind of noticed that I have multiple actions on a same data set in the lineage, which is basically the records data set in this example. I'm doing different actions on the same data set. So I decided to cache the records which I'm reading from S3. In this particular example, I persisted them to disk because my XMX is set to 512 MB. If I had persisted to memory, my program would have gone out of memory. What I noticed now is the running time dropped even further to a good 8.54 minutes. So this is a good win again. From 12 minutes, we are down to 8.5. Now, what I thought of also doing is, since I mentioned to you, Spark is interacting with S3 over here. So I thought of removing that from the equation. So I downloaded the data using the AWS CLI tool to local disk and asked Spark to read from the local file system. Now, when this program ran, it came down to a lovely 5.9 minutes, so approximately 6. So as you can see here, this includes the 2 minutes for downloading the data. I've now reduced my program running time from 12.5 to 6 minutes, which is a 50% reduction in my running time. So now I decided to play a little bit more. I decided to persist the data. So the original exercise was I was reading data from S3 and selecting a few columns. I did a transformation to lowercase and did an action. And then I did a transformation to uppercase on the same data and did an action again. So this was, the original running time was about 12.5 minutes. Okay. So what I ended up doing was, okay, I applied an asana, I disabled SSL. I noticed that the running time decreased by a minute. That was good. So here I again noticed that I have multiple actions on the same data set, which is records in this. So I decided to cache that, and I cached it to disk over here because my JVM XMX is 512 MB. This also was helpful because it reduced the running time to 8.54 minutes. So down from 12 minutes to 8.54 minutes. Now, I also thought of eliminating S3 from the picture. So I used the AWS CLI tool to download the data to local disk and read from there. When I did this, the running time was 6 minutes. So here we kind of reduced our running time from 12.5 minutes to 6 minutes. That's a 50% reduction, which is good. Now, on top of this, I decided to play more. I persisted the data again to disk. What I read from local file system, I decided to cache it, but I noticed that this was not helpful. The running time again increased to 6.8 minutes. So it did not help out caching over here, but because the best running time was 5.9 minutes. So coming to a summary of the results, the original program was around 12.5 minutes. Disabling SSL brought it down by 1 minute to 11.4. Then caching the data to disk brought it down to 8.6. Then when I eliminated S3 from the picture using the AWS CLI tool, it came down to a nice 6 minutes or 5.9. And then on top of that, I decided to persist again the data, but the running times kind of increased. So when the running times kind of increased, I stuck to my 5.9. It was a good 50% reduction over here. So that's a win for us, cut by 50%. So the big takeaway from this exercise, which I would like to share with you, is please do run your own tests. I urge you to explore your own code. Just like in yoga, you need to explore your own self. Please do explore your own code. Some asanas might work, some might not. It's always good to run your own tests and figure out, okay, this works and this does not work. So please, again, and I highlight this, please explore your own code. There's a lot more you can do with your own code. Please do that. So finally, it's about the balance. As in yoga, we try to get a balance for ourselves. So here, the balance is between your data lake, your configurations, your running mode, your framework, and the time and cost, and also the ease of use based on the choices you make. Team comfort is also an important factor when you make these decisions to reach this particular balance. So it's a journey where you try to find that balance, and I hope these asanas help you out over there. So yeah, please do try out these asanas for a cost-effective and healthy Spark life. I hope they help you. So that's all. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Vishnu. And now I feel that we are lucky that we had enough time. We had enough spare time at the end because technical difficulties made their own correctives in our talk. So, folks, I can see the one question in our chat. So I think that we are going to answer this question in the discussion at Zoom, and you should be able to find the button to go to the Zoom discussion under the video. So I think that's all. Thank you very much, Vishnu. We are happy to have you here. Thank you very much, dear attendees, for watching us. See you in discussion. Bye-bye.